Welcome, folks. We just started again here. We're going to repeat, or we're going to complete Chapter 17, 5 Days in the Philippines. Rock and roll and reel and ride. We get to meet Glenn Lang. I'm sure you're going to enjoy this chapter, Trip Across the Pond. Author Thomas DeGan. The next day, and everything went well. A group of us soldiers climbed aboard an Air Force airplane with 4 propeller-driven engines. It was used to carry passengers, so there was the luxury of sitting in an actual seat. We even got a sandwich during the 4-hour flight to Manila. We flew above clouds the entire way, so there was not much to see until we began our descent. Looking out of a window as we descended onto the airport runway, I observed many huts. They were almost square, built on stilts, and stood 12 to 15 feet above the ground. Floods must be a common occurrence in Manila. Of course, only one flood would justify the stilts, I thought. At the airport, we were greeted by a liaison person from the Air Force who introduced us to a man and his good-looking wife, both natives of the Philippine Islands. The man briefed us on things that they thought we needed to know. We went to a bank and turned our American currency into pesos. At that time, the exchange rate was 4 pesos to 1 American dollar. I ended up with 500 pesos. It was not much, though it was definitely enough to do what I wanted. We were given a group of hotels to choose from, and I chose one by the name of Washington Hotel. Normally, soldiers would pay for their 5-day stay in advance. Although I did not plan to stay in Manila 5 days, I went ahead and paid for 5 days anyway. The Washington Hotel was old enough, well kept, and it seemed to have much character. The room assigned to me was a room like any other hotel or motel. After showering, I put on some civilian clothes. They felt strange to me, kind of like living over again. The next thing was to go to some night spots, drink a little, dance a little, then pick out a woman to spend the evening with. There were a couple of men that worked with the Washington Hotel that chauffeured soldiers to different places. A Philippine man drove a 1956 Buick that seemed in excellent condition. His sidekick rode up front as he drove. One of the first things observed by me was a well-known American fast food restaurant. It amazed me that Manila was a model city of the cities in the United States. One of the more noticeable things for me was everywhere you looked there was Jeeps. Jeeps that was decorated with many different lights, coontails fastened to their antennas, large cubes representing dice mounted to the rear view mirror, and fringe going everywhere, even mud flaps with lights mounted to them. Oh, I almost forgot, each had white sidewall tires. After stopping at a couple of night spots, I picked up on a Philippine woman, at least I thought she was Philippine, and danced a couple of dances. One thing I learned, going to a couple of those night spots, was the women loved to dance. Should they not be dancing with someone, they would be dancing with themselves, usually in front of a mirror, so they could watch themselves. It was late in the evening, and I was becoming tired and drunk. I forgot which came first. The woman and I got into the back of the Buick, and the chauffeur took us to the Washington Hotel. Wasting not a moment, the woman and I jumped in the rack and proceeded to do what was natural. Then I passed out. Early in the morning, about 11:30, I had breakfast, sent up to the room. We enjoyed breakfast, then I went out of the room and outside to where the chauffeur that last drove me was standing. After explaining to the chauffeur what I wanted to do, he agreed to chauffeur me to Olangapo. Walking into the hotel, I told the clerk that the woman in my room was no longer needed. A refund would be appreciated. Without any problem, the clerk gave me my refund with a smile. The woman gone, baggage intact, I headed for Olangapo, after paying the chauffeur 50 pesos. The driver was approximately 50 miles, and the scenery was beautifully, especially when I was not occupied with thought. Having conversation with the driver and his crony made the trip even more enjoyable. It was obvious to me that the chauffeur's crony would love to take me for everything he could get. However, I realized the rules were apparently strict, as the crony wanted to suggest something and the chauffeur stopped him before his crony could say any more. Arriving in Olangapo, we stopped in front of a bar or whatever called the Florida Club. Bidding the chauffeur and his crony farewell, I got out and walked into the Florida club. The first thing on my list was to call Glenn. He was excited to hear from me and learn that I was there in Olangapo. He gave instructions on how to get to the ship. Just come on board, Tom. Shit, it's good to hear from you. We will see you in a bit, okay? The sound of Glenn's voice put me back in San Mateo, California. Okay, sport, I'll be there in a few, I said with excitement. It was not far to the ship, so I walked. Arriving at the gates, I presented my military identification card to a Marine guard, then explained to him where and who I would be seeing. The Marine guard went into the booth and got on the horn. Soon he came out and told me okay and directed me which way to go. As I left, he saluted me. Strange. However, okay with me, and I saluted him back. Walking alongside the U.S.S. Warden, I quickly observed his length, the guns, instruments, missiles, and who knows what else. There was a formation of steps going up to the top deck of the ship. At the end of the steps was an officer who snapped to and saluted me as I approached him. Again, it seemed strange to me. However, I saluted him back. The instructions that Glenn gave me were easy, and I found him without any question. We spread both of our arms outward and gave each other a big brotherly hug. Thomas, you sons of a bitch! How are you? Damn, it's good to see you. Well, how about you, sport? You're looking good. Something must be working okay. With my arm around Glenn's shoulder and his arm around mine, we walked back to Glenn's living quarters. Glenn, how come the officer back at the steps saluted me? Glenn looked at me with a blank stare, and then laughed. Shit, Tom, you're wearing civvies, and only officers can wear civvies off or on the ship. I and a few other sailors standing around started laughing. Glenn had told practically everyone on the ship that I would be coming, and everyone who met me were real nice, making the trip well worth it. We talked over good times we had spent together back in San Mateo. Then Glenn took me for a tour of the ship. What an opportunity it was for me to be a guest aboard that ship. Even the captain of the ship knew I was on R&R from Vietnam and gave me a warm welcome aboard. After the tour, Glenn informed me that he would not be able to get shore leave until Friday. That's okay with me, Glenn. I'll go back into Olangapo, pick up a woman, and find a place to spend the night. Then meet you at the Florida Club tomorrow. Okay, Tom, that sounds great. I'll meet you Friday at the Florida Club. Say, do you know where the Florida Club is? I phoned you from there, I said with a slight grin. You sly dog, Glenn jokingly said. A few minutes later, I bid Glenn farewell and made it back to Olangapo. There was one club after another on both sides of the street, and stuck between every fourth club was a hotel. Going into a few clubs, I drank a few beers and checked out the women. There definitely was plenty of them to choose from, and the only equation was how much did I want to spend. Like anywhere else, some women thought they had more to offer, and that required more dinero. After many beers had been consumed, my mission became somewhat impaired. Paying the bar for a woman that I danced with, or she danced with me, maybe we even danced with each other, we headed for a hotel. The next day, and walking down the sidewalk, a couple of gamblers approached me for a quick game of poker. Obviously, they were expert cheats. However, the idea of playing poker on a sidewalk downtown during business hours appealed to me, as long as it did not cost too much. Agreeing to play, the one man began to deal to the three of us. They tried to get me to make large bets, as the man kept dealing me a high card, though I kept the bets low. Would you not know it? When the cards were all dealt, the bullshit over, there were 4 kings in my hand. It was time to make that critical bet. Given a look of confusion, discouragement, I threw the cards down on the sidewalk. Fuck! I don't have anything worth a damn, I said angrily. I'm throwing my hand in. Have a good day, chaps. with their mouths wide open, their faces frozen, and a look of total bewilderment, I gave a smile and walked onward. Figuring the money lost, 80 pesos, was not too much of a price for the entertainment received. What the hell did I care about money anyway? I could get back to Vietnam and get myself killed the next day. It already happened to a few soldiers. It was time to stop at the Florida Club and have a few until Glenn showed. No more than 6 or 7 beers. Who was counting? And Glenn walked in with a couple of other mates. They sat at the table where I sat and ordered a couple beers. Everyone in the place knew Glenn well. Seems he had hosed every woman in the place at least 10 or 11 times. A woman perhaps in her 40s sat beside me and could not keep from stroking the hair on my arm with her fingers. One of Glenn's mates went out of the bar with a good-looking woman. When he came back into the bar a half hour later, he threw his sailor's cap in the air, hitting the ceiling and whistling simultaneously. She pulled his cord successfully. Glenn took a couple of women out through the course of the evening. Glenn had light blonde hair, light blue eyes, medium-sized build, and he could have whoever most of the time for free. He was a sight to see when it came to women. Glenn would go up to a woman, there or in the United States, say anything he wanted, and the woman would be his. The next day, the ship's crew had invited me to go with them by Chptr to one of the islands for a party. Some of the ship's crew was playing a game of football, and everyone playing, not me, was covered with mud, as it had rained the night before. Glenn, one of his mates, and I headed toward the top of a small mountain. Glenn said there were a couple of old cannons and an excellent view of the top. We were walking along, and something on the ground moved, perhaps a tripwire, and I froze solid. Glenn and his mate turned and looked at me. Their mouths opened, and they looked totally confused. "What's wrong? Are you okay, Tom?" Glenn asked with a scared look. "Fuck. I saw something move, and I thought it might have been a tripwire or whatever. Man, you were as white as a ghost. We didn't know that you could get that fucked up," Glenn said, with his friend agreeing. "We sit out there on the water and hear about things, but we don't really know what's happening or the way it is," Glenn's mate said. I assured them that everything was okay, and we walked to where the cannons were. There were 2 cannons, and they were big, all right. Glenn said they had a 10.5-inch bore, standing on top of a 3-foot wide cement wall under the barrels of the cannons. We could see for a considerable distance. The view seemed breathtaking from there. We played around, goofed off, talked, then left to go back to the party. That night, 4 of us hit a few bars, and at one of them, I focused these eyes on a seemingly good-looking woman. She came over and sat. A night in the rack with her would have been okay, though she wanted too much money for me. Simply put, I could not afford her. We went back to the Florida Club, and after a few more beers, Glenn and his mates left for the ship. A woman and I left for a hotel room. Glenn and a couple of his mates met me in the Florida Club the next morning. We partied some more, talked, and then it came time to bid farewell. I would be leaving by bus en route to Manila tomorrow morning. Glenn, the group of us, shook hands and gave each other a farewell hug as if we may never see each other again. Glenn and his mates went back to the ship, and a new woman and I went to a hotel. The weirdest woman I'd been with up to that time. Waking in the morning, I discovered that she was wearing my necklace with my dog tags on it and had my watch on her wrist. The dog tags would stay with me, and what the hell? She could have the necklace and watch. We got up, showered, clothed, and she showed me where the best place was for fried rice. After the meal, we took a taxi to the bus station. We bid farewell, then I got on the bus. Conclusion, folks. Our next chapter will be chapter 18, Last Day and Night in Manila, Philippines. Thank you for listening to all of my chapters. as we've gotten up and finished chapter 17. And I hope you hang with me, and I hope and wish that you tell your friends that there is a guy reading a book and you cannot stop. You have to keep coming back to find out what's going on. Thanks again, and check with us for the next chapter 18.